I came home from a weekend camping trip to find 3 decades-old oak trees lying in pieces across my lawn, a rented wood chipper still humming on the sidewalk. There, in the middle of the devastation, stood Karen, sipping a mimosa as if the scene before her were a quirky art installation rather than vandalism. And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Karen decides that better views are worth destroying history. The oak trees weren't just any trees. They were majestic giants that had stood watch over my property for over 30 years, witnesses to family celebrations, quiet autumn afternoons, and the slow, rhythmic changing of the seasons. They were a part of my identity, a living legacy passed down through generations. To see them reduced to splintered logs and scattered debris was not only heartbreaking, it was infuriating. I stared in disbelief at the wreckage, my mind racing to piece together how this could have happened. The wood chipper's low rumble, the smell of freshly cut timber mingled with the chill of early morning, and the sight of Karen's smug expression made one thing clear. The HOA enforcer had taken it upon herself to improve our neighborhood views, no matter the cost. I couldn't believe that someone could be so callous as to sacrifice history and natural beauty for a facade of modern perfection. But the real shock came when I discovered the legal twist. Those ancient oaks were protected by federal law. It turned out that these trees, being more than 30 years old and part of certified heritage site, had been granted special status, prohibiting any removal or destruction without a long, rigorous approval process that Karen had completely ignored. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. Not only had she vandalized my property, but she had also broken the law. In that charged moment, the anger inside me transformed into a fierce resolve. I knew that if Karen thought she could bulldoze nature for her better views, she was in for a rude awakening. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not when my heritage, my property, and the law itself were on the line. And so, I vowed that I would fight back, not just for myself, but for every homeowner who believed that history and nature should be respected. This was the moment when justice and nature would have their day. Cedar Grove Estates was a picture of suburban order, a meticulously planned, gated community where every lawn was a masterpiece of symmetry and every tree was pruned to near perfection. The Homeowners Association, HOA, ruled with an iron fist, ensuring that the community adhered to a rigid set of standards. In this well-manicured utopia, any deviation from the approved aesthetic was met with swift fines and public scorn. At the center of this quest for conformity was Karen Miller, or HOA Karen, as the residents had come to know her. In her early 50s, Karen carried herself with an air of unyielding authority. Dressed in sharply tailored outfits and armed with a clipboard and smartphone, she patrolled Cedar Grove Estates like a modern-day sentinel. To her, every misplaced flower pot, every stray bit of unapproved art, was an affront to the community's pristine image. Over the years, Karen had earned a reputation for turning even the smallest infraction into a public spectacle. And for many, she had become the very embodiment of bureaucratic overreach. In stark contrast to the regimented world of Cedar Grove Estates was my own patch of land, a sprawling property on the edge of the community that I had inherited from my family. Here, nature was allowed to thrive. My property boasted ancient oak trees that had witnessed decades of history. They were as much a part of my identity as the farm stand I ran each season. I had always valued natural beauty and creative expression over strict conformity. The oaks, with their twisting branches and deep roots, were a testament to resilience and the passage of time. They had provided shade during hot summer days, served as silent guardians during winter storms, and had even been the backdrop for countless family memories. I had built my life around the belief that property wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about history, legacy, and the freedom to live authentically. My farm stand was a celebration of local produce, handmade crafts, and the organic rhythms of rural life. It wasn't perfect in the eyes of the HOA, but it was full of character and soul, a sharp contrast to the sterile uniformity of Cedar Grove Estates. I prided myself on maintaining the natural beauty of my property, even if that meant letting a few wild patches of grass or a century-old oak grow where they might not fit the community's ideal. For years, I had quietly endured Karen's petty fines and her meddling in the natural state of my land. I had tried to reason with her, explaining that these ancient oaks weren't merely decorative. They were protected by federal law due to their historical significance. But Karen was unwavering in her belief that every aspect of the community should conform to her vision of order, even if it meant sacrificing irreplaceable natural treasures. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown. I knew that the destruction of my trees was not just a personal loss. It was an attack on our collective heritage. The oak trees were a living archive of the past, a legacy that connected generations. Karen's reckless act wasn't just about better views. It was about imposing a sterile, modern order on a landscape rich with history and character. As I surveyed the devastation, I resolved that I would not let this injustice stand. I would fight back, not with violence, but with the force of the law and a determination to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I would expose Karen's overreach for all to see, and I would ensure that the history and natural beauty of my land were preserved at any cost. This was more than a personal battle. It was a fight for the soul of Cedar Grove Estates. The days after I returned home were a whirlwind of disbelief and mounting fury. I immediately contacted a local arborist to assess the damage and verify the age and historical significance of the oak trees. The report was damning. These trees were indeed over 30 years old and qualified for federal protection under the National Historic Preservation Act. This legal safeguard meant that any removal or destruction required a lengthy, rigorous process that Karen had utterly disregarded. With the legal facts in hand, I began compiling evidence. I gathered security footage that captured the moment Karen and her accomplices arrived at my property under the cover of darkness. The grainy video clearly showed them operating a rented wood chipper, methodically reducing my beloved oaks to splintered wood. I took photographs of the devastated landscape, the broken trunks, the scattered leaves, and the disheartening absence where these giants had once stood proud. The evidence was overwhelming, and I knew that if I wanted to fight back effectively, I had to bring this case to the public's attention. I posted a detailed account on the local community forum outlining the legal protections afforded to my trees and sharing the visual evidence. My post quickly went viral within Cedar Grove Estates. Neighbors who had long harbored resentment against the HOA's inflexible rules flooded the forum with supportive messages and hashtags like #SaveOurOaks and #KarenCan'tDoThat. The digital support emboldened me. I wasn't alone in my fight against arbitrary authority. Meanwhile, Karen Miller, notorious for her fierce dedication to maintaining a picture-perfect community, had no idea of the legal storm that was about to descend upon her. In her eyes, her actions were justified, a necessary measure to improve the view from a neighborhood and to enforce the strict standards that she believed held our community together. She had already sent out stern notices and fines to my property, claiming that the trees violated some obscure aesthetic regulation. But now, with federal law on my side and a growing chorus of voices demanding justice, her actions were poised to backfire. I decided that words alone wouldn't suffice. I needed to take concrete action to ensure that Karen's overreach was not only exposed, but also met with a significant penalty. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in environmental and property law, and we discussed the possibility of filing a suit against the HOA for violating federal protections. Simultaneously, I prepared to present my case to the local board, armed with expert testimony, legal documents, and the undeniable visual evidence of my loss. The community's response further intensified the conflict. At a neighborhood meeting, residents recounted similar grievances, stories of arbitrary fines, property modifications imposed without consent, and a general sense of powerlessness in the face of the HOA's strict enforcement. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. People began to speak out, emboldened by the prospect of reclaiming their rights. The meeting ended with a unanimous call for the board to review its policies and to hold those responsible accountable. As the tension escalated, I received several messages from local preservation societies and environmental groups, offering to support my case and demanding an investigation into the unauthorized tree removal. Their backing added an official layer of weight to my battle. It was no longer just about my personal loss. It was about preserving the natural heritage of Cedar Grove Estates for future generations. Late one night, while reviewing the final draft of my legal complaint and compiling the last of the evidence, I sat in my study, my mind racing with thoughts of justice and retribution. The images of the once majestic oaks lying in ruins were burned into my memory. I knew that this battle was a turning point, a moment when the community would have to choose between blind conformity and the right to preserve history and nature. Determined to see the matter through, I scheduled a meeting with the HOA board to present my case formally. I made sure to invite local media and community leaders, ensuring that the discussion would be public and that Karen's actions could no longer be swept under the rug. With every piece of evidence, every legal document, and every testimony from supportive neighbors, I built a case that was impossible to ignore. The stage was set for a showdown between a homeowner fighting to protect his heritage and an overzealous enforcer determined to impose her arbitrary rules. In the days following my public outcry, Cedar Grove Estates was abuzz with activity. Social media platforms lit up with discussions, memes, and hashtags. Hashtag Save Our Oaks, hashtag Karen Exposed, and hashtag Trees Not Fines trended among our community's residents. The evidence of the tree destruction was shared widely, and soon local news channels began covering the story. Reporters interviewed shocked residents who recalled the beauty of the ancient oaks and the deep sense of loss that now hung in the air. "These trees are a part of our heritage," one neighbor tearfully declared on live television, "and seeing them reduced to rubble is heartbreaking." Local preservation groups rallied behind me, and a petition demanding that the HOA board take immediate action against such blatant violations quickly gathered thousands of signatures. The digital dossier I had compiled, complete with security footage, expert reports, and legal documents, became a symbol of resistance against arbitrary rule enforcement. Every shared post and every hashtag amplified the message. Our community's natural heritage was under attack, and we would not stand idly by. Within the HOA board, the incident ignited fierce debates. Emergency meetings were convened, and behind closed doors, board members argued heatedly about the appropriate response. Some staunchly defended Karen's actions, insisting that the removal of the trees was justified in the name of improving community views. Others, however, began to see the absurdity of the situation and recognize that the trees were not only legally protected, but also an integral part of the community's identity. Leaked minutes from these meetings revealed a growing rift among the board members, a divide that reflected the broader discontent simmering among the residents. I continued to document every development, posting live updates and detailed blog entries that chronicled the community's rising outrage. Neighbors shared their own stories of similar grievances, and the overall sentiment was clear. The HOA's draconian rules and Karen's unchecked authority were stifling creativity and destroying irreplaceable heritage. Local influencers and bloggers joined the conversation, praising my stand for property rights and condemning the arbitrary nature of the fines. This isn't just about trees. It's about our right to live in a community that values history, nature, and freedom, one popular blogger wrote, and the words resonated across Cedar Grove Estates. As the pressure mounted, the HOA board announced a final public hearing to address the controversy. The meeting was scheduled for a crisp morning, and anticipation buzzed in every corner of our community. Flyers were distributed, digital petitions reached record numbers, and residents prepared to attend the hearing in droves. It was clear that this wasn't merely a personal battle anymore. It had become a community-wide call for justice, for the preservation of our natural heritage, and for accountability against arbitrary enforcement. On the morning of the final hearing, the community center was packed with residents. Neighbors who had long been silenced by fear of punitive fines and overzealous rule enforcement now stood united. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of anger, hope, and determination. I arrived with my digital dossier in hand, fully prepared to present the evidence and demand that the board acknowledge the grievous mistake that had been made. Every shared video clip and every supportive comment on social media reinforced the idea that our rights as homeowners and stewards of history were non-negotiable. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, a final confrontation that would force the HOA board to either stand by outdated policies or embrace a new era of respect for individual rights and natural heritage. The decisive moment came on a cool, crisp morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedar Grove Estates Community Center. The room was filled with a diverse mix of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the future of property rights and creative freedom in our community. With a calm yet unyielding presence, Councilwoman Rebecca Hayes stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the collective resolve of Cedar Grove's residents. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including security footage, expert testimony, legal documents, and the impassioned voices of our community, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Hayes began, her voice resonant with authority. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically the unauthorized destruction of these historic oak trees, were not only a gross violation of property rights, but also a direct contravention of federal law designed to protect our natural heritage. Our community's right to preserve our history and our environment must be upheld at all costs. A heavy silence fell over the room as Hayes continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to this incident, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such overreach. Furthermore, new guidelines will be implemented to ensure that all future actions respect both our local and federal laws. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an unjust act. It is a resounding declaration that Cedar Grove will stand for justice, preservation, and the inalienable rights of every property owner. Her words struck a chord, and murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a respected community advocate, renowned for his steadfast defense of natural heritage, rose to speak. "Today we stand united," he declared, his voice firm and impassioned. "No one in our community should have to witness the destruction of our cherished landmarks by someone who thinks they can dictate what we value. Let this vote mark the turning point, a clear signal that we will protect our history and our environment from arbitrary interference. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is rectified." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a resolute call for reform. Following his address, a senior officer from the local environmental oversight agency presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of digital evidence, expert evaluations, and official reports confirming that the oak trees were indeed federally protected. The evidence was irrefutable. Karen Miller's actions were a clear abuse of power, and her failure to obtain the proper permits was a violation of the law. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Hayes concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Grove, a community where every resident's rights, our historical landmarks, and our natural environment are protected with the utmost integrity." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will not allow personal vendettas to dictate the future of our community. Together, we stand for justice, accountability, and the preservation of our heritage. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for property rights and environmental justice. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Grove. The days of arbitrary, destructive enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for both individual rights and natural heritage was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Cedar Grove underwent a remarkable transformation. News of the rescinded fines and the sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, igniting fervent debates about property rights, environmental preservation, and the importance of upholding federal law. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Grove" and "Community United for Heritage," celebrated the decisive action taken to protect our natural landmarks. Hashtags like #SaveOurOaks, #NoMoreKaren, and #HeritageRights trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand up against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their own experiences and envision a future where history and nature were not sacrificed at the altar of conformity. Neighbors, who had long been intimidated by the oppressive practices of the HOA, now spoke passionately about their right to preserve the unique character of Cedar Grove. "Our trees tell the story of our community," one resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice resonating with pride and determination. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that our collective heritage would be safeguarded for future generations. Within the reformed HOA board and local environmental agencies, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical governance, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was scrutinized fairly and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines or destructive enforcement. Our duty is to protect our heritage and the rights of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and preservation. Community leaders and local conservation groups mobilized to further empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about the importance of environmental stewardship and the legal protections afforded to our natural landmarks. When we stand together, our voices are powerful enough to defend our history, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a more inclusive and respectful governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen Miller's reckless act of cutting down my beloved oak trees, not only to reclaim my property rights, but also to protect a vital piece of our collective heritage, had ignited a movement that resonated throughout Cedar Grove. Neighbors who had long suffered in silence now found their voices and shared their own stories of loss and hope, uniting in a common cause to safeguard our natural legacy. The digital evidence that exposed Karen's misdeeds became a beacon of hope and a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of our environment and the right to live in a community that honors its past. Karen Miller, once the feared enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale. A stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice and preservation. Her influence waned rapidly, and digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the necessity of reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Grove, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the gentle glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Heritage," was unfurled between majestic oaks, and heartfelt speeches echoed promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not only the victory of our rights, but the triumph of our heritage over arbitrary interference, Councilwoman Hayes proclaimed, her voice firm and resolute. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our legacy and ensure that no one can abuse their power again. As each new day dawned over Cedar Grove, The legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen Miller's misguided attempt to cut down my federally protected oaks was met with a community-wide stand for justice became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the preservation of history and nature. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Cedar Grove, truth, justice, and respect for our heritage would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Grove would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for our natural and cultural heritage were cherished above all else.